It's great to be here, and we're going to talk a little bit about parents and the retail space and a little bit more than that. So let me take a minute to introduce you to Babycenter. If you are unfamiliar with the brand, we are a global digital resource for parents. We reach over 50 million unique parents around the globe every single month, 16 to 7 million in the US. So we've got about 11 owned and operated websites, 9 languages. So we're serving parents all around the globe. That's the commercial side of our business. We also serve underserved parents in different parts of the world who need help on this journey of parenting. So we're not going to talk about that today, but it is a really important part of Babycenter's vision and our mission. We've been doing this for 20 years. I was talking earlier to some folks. Babycenter was started by 2 dads in Stanford who thought there was a need for parenting information. They were new dads, didn't know what they were doing, so they started Babycenter. That means we've got 20 years of data and insights. So we understand parents, we know what they like, what they don't like, and importantly for all of you, what they want and don't want from brands. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as it applies to the retail space. Proud to say that Gen Z and millennials find Babycenter a fantastic resource. It's a fun place to work, and I'm proud to say that we've helped millions and millions of parents along probably the most important journey they're going to take in their lives. So just let's ground ourselves in who we're talking about today, Gen X. I think you're all familiar with Gen X, population of 61 million according to the census. Millennials are between the ages today of 23 and 37. This makes the bulk of our audience. The average age of a first-time mom in the US is a little over age 26. And then Gen Z, I want to say kids. They are kids. They're 7. The oldest is 22. This is the generation that's going to have a major impact on everyone in this room. At Babycenter, we're watching them very closely. I imagine you all are too, and for good reason. Right now, they already contribute $44 billion to the US economy. They influence another $600 billion when you tie that back to family spending. And although this generation represents about 15% of parents today, within 5 years, they're going to be square in the demographic of parenting, and they are going to be a major force. So we're watching them closely. So let's take a step back and talk about what happens when you become a parent. How many are parents in this room? Lots of you are parents. So this is what we call at Babycenter the birth control slide, because this is what happens. After a woman becomes a mom, she adds 9 additional hours of parenting time to her day. You can imagine feeding, getting your kid to sleep, on and on and on. As a consequence, she loses 13 hours of time for herself. There's still only 24 hours in a day, so you can imagine the challenge that happens here. And what does happen is she has to shift her priorities. So before she became a mom, romance was at the top of her list in terms of things that were important to her: fashion, me time, fitness. Then look what happens after. Number 1, her child's well-being. That's not surprising. What's kind of surprising is that's only at 98%, not 100, but we can move on. This is not to say that being in shape and being fashionable aren't important. In fact, to millennials and specifically to the older end of Gen Z who are already having kids, looking good after having a baby is just, if not more important to these women. They don't want to lose their pre-baby selves, but their priorities shift. Child is definitely number 1, and that has a whole host of impact, which we'll talk about. But it's not just about moms anymore. Dads are absolutely in the picture. The stereotype of dad just being the breadwinner and supporting the family has gone out the window. We don't want to portray, you all shouldn't be portraying dad like that in advertising either. More to come on that. But on the left-hand side is a great example of divide and conquer. That's what's happening in families today. Some recent research that we did, 58% of dads say that they put family before work at least most of the time, and nearly half say they would give up a promotion if it meant that they could spend more time with their family. So regardless of generation, so millennial, Gen Z, even Gen X, when it comes to buying products and brands, and when it comes to deciding which brands you're really going to love, there are 3, I added a 4th, but 3 main purchase criteria that really are table stakes. It's cost of entry if you're talking to parents today, and that's good quality, safety, and easy to use. This really spans across category too. It's not just about car seats and strollers, but think about food. Think about automobiles. If you are lacking in one of these three areas, you're going to have a tough ride when it comes to marketing and talking to parents. Price is on here. It is a factor. Price absolutely does influence preference. So the other thing that also influences preference is recommendations. And we've been talking about word of mouth for years, but it comes to parents, and especially first-time parents, recommendation by another parent, particularly in the 18 to 24 age range, the older Gen Z demographic, 3 out of 4 are saying it's super important to have a recommendation from another parent who's been there, tried it, done it, when they're looking for things to buy. Recommended by experts is increasing a little bit when you were looking at the older age segment of Gen Z versus millennials. And you can see the quote over here, especially for new moms, new parents, they don't know what they need. They don't know what half these products do. So they really are looking for information and recommendations from other parents. And it's important to note that parenthood is not a stagnant state. It's constantly changing. Your needs are changing as your children age. And so as brands, it's important to know when these changes are happening so you can lean in on recommendations when it's most relevant. So let's talk quickly, trying to cover a lot of ground here, but let's talk about media. This is a staggering statistic. Gen Z, the older end of Gen Z, 18 to 24, remember we're just talking about Gen Z who are already parents, spend 6 hours more with media per day than their millennial counterparts. That is a lot of time with media. It's 18 hours in a day. Of course, there's a lot of multitasking and many screens going on at once with this generation. I can tell you what's driving that, and it's video. Over half of that additional 3 hours is coming from video. I have younger Gen Z children in my household, and they are constantly on YouTube. That's what, they don't even watch television anymore, and they rarely ask to watch a movie. They are watching video, whether they're streaming it, they're looking on their phones. So there's lots more information behind here, which I'm not going to cover now, but it's important to know they're spending this time with media, and they're consuming it in different ways and on different platforms. We found that over half, almost half, of parents 18 to 34 own an IoT device. And in our research, we defined an IoT device as something that connects to the internet, but is not a smartphone, a tablet, or a PC. And in fact, over half of 18 to 24-year-old parents say that these devices make them better parents. They feel more confident, it's convenient, it's easy to use, it gets them the information that they're looking for. So it's important to understand that this generation is really, really adventurous. They want to try new things, and frankly, they want the content that they need when they want it and where they want it. So as a marketer, even as a publisher, it's really important to take note of that. So they're consuming all this media, yet we find a love-hate relationship, especially among Gen Z, with media and technology. Among parents 25 years or younger, these are direct quotes from our research. The internet has invaded our homes, and it's changing, even destroying, the way that we communicate with each other. Another one says, I think families rely on TV and media a little bit too much and should take time out to do more things together. They're definitely conflicted. They're consuming media, but they don't know if it's the right thing to do, especially once they become parents. Who knows Central Perk? Who remembers this? Yes, good. It's interesting that Friends, the television show, has become one of the most highly rated television shows among 20-somethings today. I think the reason for that is not what it's about, but what's not there. There's no tweeting, there's no texting, there's no Tinder. There's no online shopping. It's friends sitting around a couch talking. And I think this generation in particular longs for that a little bit. I mean, you can walk down the street in Starbucks and everyone's head down in a PC on their phone. A couple people might be chatting, but that's not the norm. So this is going to be fascinating to watch, this next generation and how they deal with this struggle. Another thing that we're seeing with this generation of modern parents is what they find valuable and what they see in brands. 84% of that older Gen Z generation say that when it comes time to buy and choose brands, a brand that shares their values is going to have an impact on their purchase. A brand that respects all family types. We've done a lot of research on the modern family. So 2 moms, 2 dads, multi-generation, a working mom and a stay-at-home dad. All that stuff is normal now. That's normal. Diversity is also something that's super important today. And also, as marketers, really key to remember, this generation wants to see that reality reflected back in advertising. 8 in 10 of Gen Z says it's important. Portray, reflect back my reality, and that connection is going to be made stronger. Same thing with moms. They want to see real moms. They don't want to see the models and things like that. It's not who they are, and they can't identify it with it. So if you want to connect and establish a relationship, you need to reflect who they are. And finally, it's not just about moms. Again, remember, half of dads would give up a promotion to stay home with their family, or at least spend a little bit more time with their family. So 36% of moms said that they agree dads are really taking on more parenting responsibility, yet only 1 in 5 said that they think dads are portrayed realistically in advertising. I mean, I can't count how many times a dad in an ad is portrayed as the bumbling dad who can't change a diaper, or can't, clean up a kitchen. It's always some kind of disaster. That's not reality. And there are plenty of brands that are still showing dads in that way, and they're going to lose that connection pretty quickly with today's Gen Z parents. So just to sum up here, what does this mean for you if you're a marketer or if you're a publisher? It's important to keep in mind 3 key things. The top criteria for brands are really non-negotiable. They're table stakes, and you need to have quality, safety. Your products have to be easy to use, or parents aren't going to pay any attention. We talked about that love-hate relationship. There is definitely something going on there. They're spending so much additional time with media, which actually is a great thing for you as a marketer because you have that much more time in which to reach them. But they're conflicted, and you've got to offer them something of value in order for them to make that connection with your brand. And when you do, you've got to respect the values of Gen Z, particularly millennials too, but we're seeing it more and more with Gen Z. You have to portray them realistically in advertising, and you've got to connect with them on a level that's beyond a coupon or a deal. There's a little bit of a distrust going on in the world today, especially with corporate America. So it's important to understand this generation and what they're looking for. They want to try new things. They want to buy new brands, but it's the brands and the marketers that really take the time to understand this generation, particularly as parents. They're going to be the ones that win. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll So next up we have Brian Johnson from Pinterest. He has been in the digital space since 2000, so he is a digital veteran as well. He was at Yahoo during their second heyday and in Facebook for several years, and now he's at Pinterest. So the kind of thing about Brian and what he's been doing is he's always kind of going into these innovative spaces and just shaping just the new way of communication. So let's give him a big round of applause as we switch out presentations. I'm going to grab you a fresh water.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Ooh, is the mic on? Yes. Perfect. All right, thanks, folks. So Brian Johnson, happy to be here today and talk with you guys a little bit about Pinterest and some of the work we're doing on the platform. And then I'm also going to follow up and share some research that we're doing on how consumers are thinking through the purchase journey, how pinners look at it potentially different than non-pinners, and like what that means for you guys. So I promise this won't be a sales pitch, although if you come away with a few good conclusions, that's probably not a bad thing. So how many of you guys are on Pinterest? Just for a quick show of hands. Awesome, I think we're beating the national average. Typically about a third of the US is on Pinterest at this point in time, and that number is growing quickly. So for those of you who aren't on Pinterest, I'm just going to kind of set the table very quickly for how we think about the platform and the value that the platform provides to consumers in the US and around the world. So this has evolved a bit over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, but we think of Pinterest now as a planning tool, right? This is a planning tool where people are coming and discovering great ideas and content that's influenced their lives in different ways. They can plan for things like, what am I going to make for dinner tonight? What am I going to serve this weekend when I have people coming over to my house? To everything like big, like fundamentally big family decisions in terms of like, how do I think about the budget? Or maybe the lake house I would love to buy in 20 years in Wisconsin. I can plan for that stuff now. Not all of it's going to come true, but hopefully a decent amount of it does, and ultimately this will enable people to live more inspired lives. So it's a planning tool, and it's really about possibility. Half of my company is in France right now, talking to some of our partners. And what we're talking about is fundamentally very different than what Facebook and Instagram and some of these other platforms talk about. In an ideal world, people are coming to Pinterest, they're discovering, finding good ideas, and then they're doing them. So we are very much not about the amount of time people spend on Pinterest, while that's a good thing. We're very much about you spending quality time on Pinterest and then going and doing those things in real life. Like that's what gets our founder, Ben Silbermann, really excited. And that's what I love about the company that I'm working for. So these possibilities, and if you think about these possibilities, it's really just about designing your life, right? You come to Pinterest and you can find new ideas that might open your eyes to new passions and interests you might have. You could come to Pinterest and, it's basically just all about discovery and finding things that you're passionate about. So how does this take place? And what I love about this is it's done by humans and not computers. People have come to Pinterest over the course of the last 7 years since the company started, and they have brought over 100 billion pieces of content that has been, by people, curated onto over 2 billion boards. So if you think about that for a second, people are taking content and they are placing that content in relevant ways that's meaningful to them as individuals. And if you think back to what the ConAgra folks were talking about this morning, they talk about the jobs that consumers are looking to have done, or the jobs theory. Other companies will have other terminology like that. Basically, people are saying, like, here are the jobs of what I want to do, and Pinterest is helping them discover the solutions to enable those jobs. So it's pretty exciting for us to have a front seat view into what CPG companies are doing and how that's meaningful to their brands and their businesses as they plan for the future. So this is what makes it all happen. And if you think about how it's discovered, there's really 2 main ways. People come and they browse a home feed when they're browsing, very similar to a Facebook home feed. And then secondarily, and increasingly becoming more important every day, is search. If I were to envision 5 years from now, I think Pinterest will be known much more as a search company than a social media company. But we still got a ways to go on this front. So this is how content's being discovered on the platform. And so brands and marketers need to think about, like, when people are coming to Pinterest and looking for great ideas, do I have the right content in the platform for those that are looking to browse? Hopefully you do. Do I have the right content in the platform when people are coming to search? And again, hopefully you do. So that's it. That's just a quick general background on like what Pinterest is, the platform that we're building, and a little bit of how it compares to some of the other platforms you guys are probably very attuned to. And you can see some of the examples here of the search experience. See if it goes. It's not going. But basically what would show you is somebody searching for a leather armchair. And then what we do is when they start with a very broad search like that, we have a guided search product that enables them to dive deeper into exactly what they're looking for, again, to enable the most personalized experience on the platform. All right, so towards the end of last year, we did some research to really dig into how people shop and consume content on Pinterest and how that influences the things that they buy or the things that they don't buy. So that's what we're going to dive into today. I will not try to pretend to be the research person. So some of the details here might not have all the answers, but basically we did a lot of qualitative and quantitative research to dig into this. And again, this is research that was done by a partnership. We have a company called Deep Focus, and we really dug into the differences here and like how people think about various platforms. So like I said before, if Pinterest is a place where people are coming and discovering their taste, we said, hey, when you're starting to go shopping, like how do you view these platforms and what are the value these platforms enable for you? And you can see here what we did is we indexed inspirational attributes and rational attributes. And what you'll see is like Pinterest has a place that's pretty influential in how people are thinking about the products that they buy. And you can see how it's complemented by how people think about Amazon and Google. Again, you'll notice there's nothing really highlighted in the Facebook and Instagram world. Again, people don't go to shop on those sites. I think you could definitely say, are people inspired and influenced by those things? Yes, but they don't view them as a shopping experience. So this is pretty interesting, right? And if you look at the 4 companies up there with Pinterest, we are, by all intents and purposes, very much the small startup. And so this is important for us. Like, we've got to get this stuff really done well, or else Pinterest probably doesn't exist. So what does this mean for you guys? Like, it's an interesting opportunity, right? If Pinterest is playing a role in all those things, you have an opportunity to reach people when they come to the platform with intent and to reach them before they've made a decision for what they're going to buy, right? By the time they're going to Google and they're searching for XYZ branded search term, it's probably too late. They already know what they want. All the searches on Pinterest are unbranded for the most part. So it's an interesting place to play. All right, back to the data. What do people do when they start shopping? And this data is cut by pinners in red and non-pinners in gray. And we've looked at this in 2 ways, inspiration and information. And not surprisingly, people who are on Pinterest are driven a little bit more by inspiration than people who aren't. So you can just some interesting stats to show you like what really gets people going when they start shopping. And what's influencing their decisions? Again, cut by pinners and non-pinners. Pinners are driven by inspiration. Again, not surprising. And what does that mean then? It means pinners are more likely to buy things that are maybe a little bit more spontaneous or a little bit more fun, or what we'll see in a second, like the perfect gift. They care about it. They're very thoughtful and thorough. And it's not to say that people who aren't on Pinterest aren't thoughtful and thorough and all those things, right? But you can see the numbers change a little bit between the two. And what we think this really leads into is a more inspired shopping kind of demand as people go through the funnel, right? Starting with inspiration to discover, evaluate, and act. And if I'm critical of Pinterest at this point in time, I'd say we're very good at inspiration and discovery. We've got a ways to go to really make the act portion of this meaningful pinners on the platform. But if we do that, I think what this leads to is people buying a lot of the products that they see on Pinterest. So what you can see here is this is so we asked some questions about being more likely to spend, recommending products, and really this just gets down to things that we've actually confirmed through other sources, that people who are on Pinterest buy a lot of stuff, right? And that is demographically true, right? If you just think about our sweet spot of women in the US who are 18 to 54. But they're thoughtful, they care about the things that they're doing in their lives. And again, if we're doing a good job as a platform, hopefully we're helping them find great ideas and living really inspired lives. This is meaningful to retailers, right? So what we did is we said, like, you know, for the people shopping at Amazon, Walmart, Target, Home Depot, like in particular, like how influential is Pinterest? And you can see these percentages are not insignificant. So this tells us like we're providing value to the partners we work with every day on the platform. And we're also seeing this with our CPG results. We're doing a lot of work with Oracle Data Logics just to help people understand, all right, when you spend $1 on Pinterest, what does it get you? So I'm going to cut short there. So what are the key takeaways from this? One, like people are being inspired every day on Pinterest, and that inspiration is leading to people buying more product, being inspired to go out and buy products. And it's really just an opportunity for brands to grow, right? Like it's a challenging landscape out there today where, like, you know, frankly, some brands aren't growing or most brands aren't. So what are the ways that people can grow? And we believe at Pinterest, if you inspire them with the right pieces of content, that you can start to enable growth across the category that you're focused on. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for the time, and we'll continue on.
And we'll get his presentation up in a second. He is with Morningstar, so we're very happy to have another Morningstar person on stage today. He is a senior retail, restaurant, and e-commerce analyst. I know that Amazon is one of the brands that he analyzed, so he's had a little bit of a busy week with the news that they had. He's a finalist for the Crain's 40 Under 40, and he does regular media appearances on CNBC, PBS Nightly, and other business radio shows and news shows. So he's going to talk about the latest trends in retail and how brands are transforming their businesses. Hey.
Are we good?
Where is it in the back? Right here. Let's see if the green light's on. Okay, great.
That would be it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Hope, and thank you for being here today. I hope you enjoyed our building. We've been here about 6-7 years, and it's a great space to work. So hopefully you've enjoyed it today. As Hope mentioned, my name is Harvey. I am the lead consumer analyst for Morningstar. I get the privilege of covering the e-commerce, restaurant, and retail space. And as she mentioned, it has been kind of a hectic week. The presentation I would have used on this about a week ago was completely irrelevant, so I'm testing out some new slides to you at this point. So hopefully you'll get something out of it. One of the things that's interesting is just in listening to Julie and Brian here. We have 3 very different presentations today, but I think there's a lot of common threads and common themes that we'll introduce here. I'm going to structure my presentation in kind of a bad news, good news structure here. We'll talk about the state of the retail market in the U.S. right now. A lot of bad news just because of the disruption of Amazon and what's going on, and obviously it's been a very busy week on that front. But then there are a lot of things that brands and retailers can be doing to adjust to attract audiences in an Amazon world. So just to give you kind of a little bit of background, just to frame the conversation, this is the U.S. retail market right now. In 2016, there were about $4.8 trillion in retail sales in the U.S. About, I guess, a little bit close, about 9% were actually on e-commerce. However, if you look the next 4 or 5 years, we expect that e-commerce, and that's including both desktop and mobile, to grow at about, call it a 13-14% growth rate, whereas traditional retail is going to continue to grow at basically inflationary levels, 2%. So obviously it's going to continue to gain share, and continue to be one of the preferred ways that consumers shop. However, there are opportunities for physical retailers, which we'll get into a little bit later. Now, in terms of just e-commerce itself, just because it is such a hot topic, this is a slide that we've put together, just kind of what are the key categories right now. And no surprise, consumer electronics is the big one. But I think the second one here, apparel accessories, just because that has been a very big topic this week with Amazon. That seems like it is probably the next space to be disrupted here. I would throw grocery in that too. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is just kind of the landscape of e-commerce and kind of gives you a sense where there might be future disruption. So now, just to talk about the bad news here, this week has been really a game changer. I think it's going to end up being an inflection point for the retail industry. Amazon's been getting into grocery and apparel for some time, at least they've been trying to. But between the acquisition of Whole Foods and the Amazon wardrobe announcement that hit on Tuesday, as well as I throw the announcement that Nike's going to start selling on Amazon as well, these are the big announcements. And really the most significant parts are most significant inroads into these categories that Amazon's made. It also removed 2 key barriers that's been keeping them in this industry or out of this industry for a while. With the acquisition of Whole Foods, now that Amazon adds the whole base of suppliers, they hadn't had credibility in the fresh food side, and we think that's been a major reason that's been kind of slowing, or a reason why consumers have been slow to adopt online grocery. But now that they've got the credibility that Whole Foods brings with fresh food and produce suppliers, that's going to be a big part of the growth story here. With Amazon wardrobe, the big issue holding that back is how costly it had been for returns. Now with this wardrobe, where if you hadn't seen the announcement, effectively what Amazon's going to do is you pick 5 to 10 items, they'll send a box, you keep as much of that you want, and depending on how much you keep, depends on how much of a discount, but the returns will be free. That's going to be very disruptive for the department stores and traditional apparel retailers. What's interesting about this is just, you think of an acquisition of Whole Foods by Amazon. That's something you would have never imagined just a few years ago, just because Amazon has obviously built up their presence, without a physical store presence. But we do think that these initiatives, particularly Whole Foods initiative, will work for several reasons. The first is that the Prime membership. I think that's going to go down as one of the monumental developments in the consumer space the last couple of decades. We estimate that there's about 60 million Prime members in the U.S. alone today, and another 40 million outside the U.S. Quick show of hands here. How many Prime members do we have in the group? So almost everybody. How many people shop Whole Foods? Right there. I think that's the big proof that there's a lot of overlap. It's going to be an easy way to communicate with Amazon buyers and really reinforce. The next step is going to be probably getting those emails already about Prime Fresh. I think that's going to be the next step for them to escalate people to that higher pricing tier. I talked about it already. You get the credibility through fresh food with Whole Food suppliers. With the apparel side, seamless delivery return capabilities, it's very difficult. I mean, retailers, that's not their business. So that's really been one of Amazon's key advantages. Julia talked about it during the earlier presentation, easy to use and convenience being a very key. That's almost as much of a purchase consideration than the product or price itself at this point, and that's very difficult for apparel manufacturers or any other retailer to replicate. Brian talked about this a little too. The idea of being fun, I think, is going to be a very interesting wrinkle to the acquisition. The idea that Amazon can bring in some of their technologies and devices in the store, not only to sell them, but also to showcase the different things that they offer, automate the stores a little bit more, and really become a curiosity and a destination store at the same time. And on top of everything else, Amazon's got unrivaled access to customer data through all these transactions. It can be very difficult to compete on that front. This is just a quick slide, just one other competitive advantage that we thought was be interesting to present here. If you look across on the left-hand side here, it's the number of SKUs that Amazon has currently in their warehouses versus their inventory turnover. So how many times they turn over that inventory, sell that inventory through every year. Amazon's really in a unique stratosphere at this point. They have more products and can turn that quicker than anybody else, and that's really speaking to that idea of convenience that we talked about earlier. Not surprising, we do think that the U.S. retail industry is overstored at this point. We've seen some other studies that says there needs to be about 1 billion square feet of U.S. rationalized over the next couple of years. You've probably seen it a lot in the media these days. Thus far, just through 4 months of this year, we've already seen more store closures than we had seen all of last year, and we expect that to continue. This is going to end up being probably one of the biggest years for store closings since 2008, 2009, the recession. It really is for a lot of retailers, it's time to look at your square footage and really are you getting maximum use out of that and rethink a lot of strategies. But we'll talk about some of that here in a second. And so this is the shift into the good part of the good news part of the presentation, is that we do see several examples of retailers that are doing a lot of things right in this environment to make themselves more relevant, to reinvent themselves, and become a destination for consumers. Really, we've kind of boiled it down to 3 factors, the brands and retailers that we've seen that have been successful in this environment. The first is specialization. And I think this kind of speaks back to Julia's comment about quality. Knowing who you are and knowing what you're not and becoming an expert in whatever that particular field, I think is very important. This day and age, consumers are so well informed and so smart. They know when you're trying to pass yourself off as something you're not. Convenience. I think this is the number one factor in terms of purchase decision this day and age. Amazon's really retrained us how we shop. And if you can't get something to a consumer's door within 2 days, they're probably going to go elsewhere for that product. It really is, it's taken a lot of retailers time to kind of recognize this, but the fact that you really do need to make it a omni-channel approach to ordering and fulfillment is so critical in this day and age. And then I think this last one is something, as retailers have been scrambling to, work on their mobile and e-commerce platforms and their fulfillment centers, a lot of times they forget that the most important thing is your store asset. Making that worthwhile and making that a destination, giving consumers just a reason to leave their houses is so important. And so I think that a lot of retailers have failed to invest in the experiential part of the retail of their stores. So I'll talk about each one of these in just a little bit more detail. So specialization, one of the things I've talked to a couple brand experts and brand managers is, know your limitations. Know what you are, but know your limitations. If if it isn't a core competency of yours, that's one of the first things that can diminish your brand, is that consumers see right past you. If you're trying to pass yourself off as an organic and natural, health food company, and you're really not, consumers are going to see right through that, especially with how much information flow and how much content that's out there on the internet. One of the interesting things that I've looked at in terms of this is, sometimes in this day and age you see wages going up and people are looking to cut costs wherever they can. Hiring is very important. So hiring basically your customers or your suppliers, people who know and love your business, whatever it is you happen to be selling, I think that's critical. Again, that speaks to the credibility, to the quality, the overall experience. And this is an interesting one that's come up. This is actually coming from some of the restaurant brands I've talked to. It's not just enough to be a lifestyle brand anymore. That used to be the buzzword really about the last 5-10 years, but I think that's evolved into being more of an impact brand. And the difference is, the impact brand makes a difference not only in that consumer's life, but also the surrounding community, whereas the lifestyle brand just impacts the consumer's lifestyle. So I think that's a very important point this day and age. You have to do more than just cater that consumer's lifestyle. This is just a quick chart kind of talking about the different ways that, different categories we've looked at in terms of what are the most insulated from an e-commerce standpoint. Kind of the idea of specialization. Some product categories are going to lend themselves much more to specialization than others. So kind of ranking, this is a study we did in 2015, I think, looking at the different categories. Home improvement at the top of that list, just because that's a very different product. There's an immediacy of need with it. When something breaks at your house, you can't wait for 2 days shipping. A lot of times there's restrictions on shipping that product. Auto parts is another one that you see a lot of similarities, although Amazon is making some inroads into that category. Luxury, that kind of speaks to the experiential aspect that we talked about. This is one where people like to see it, like to go and visit the stores because there's this upscale experiential aspect to it. But then if you continue to go down, department stores, which again, that's one that's probably going to be falling down the rankings if we had to because of the Amazon wardrobe announcement. Pet supplies, that's one, or at least you have the services aspect protecting things, but you do see some competition in the hard goods. Off-price is a category that's pretty well protected on some aspects, but then you start to see Amazon getting in the apparel side. Then all the way down to consumer electronic toys, the commodity categories, where there's very little protecting those categories longer term, and very little need for a physical store presence for some things. There'll be certain aspects, certain cycles within that keeps people coming back to different places, but the ultimate purchase is probably going to happen online. So convenience, we talked about this being just really the most important thing in the purchase decision. I mean, at this point, how quickly it gets to your doorstep is almost as important as the product or the cost itself. So as a brand, think about how you're making consumers' lives easier. That should be one of the first things you ask as you look at your brand and look at your retail format. Reducing in-store complexity. A lot of times, with all these changes and all these things, you ship from a store or mobile kiosks or different ways to kind of make sure that you capture that point of sale purchase. Sometimes that adds a lot of complexity and that can turn off consumers. Again, ease of order, logistics, almost important as the product itself. Returns is a key thing. And again, this is sometimes falls outside the area of a retailer's core competency, but you have to have a seamless solution to making returns possible. And then ultimately, the retailers that offer the consumers the greatest level of convenience will have the greatest pricing power. Skip over this. It's just kind of a slide we put together on kind of the different activities that we see from mobile devices. It was just going to be my bridge to my next point about the overall experience in there. But really the point I'm making on that is that mobile devices really are an extension of the experience, and there's a lot of creative ways that retailers are getting back into the game and competing with Amazon through mobile devices. So some of the things that we've seen from successful retailers on the experience side, in-store events, that's a big one that gives consumers a reason to come to your store, makes them feel like you're part of your brand. Think about all the design aspects of your store too. Every little thing from the checkout desk to the fixtures, all those can have a lasting impact on consumers. And we've seen those retailers that have really done a good job investing and kind of being mindful that every little design element can have an impact on how things operate in the store. Embracing mobile and internet technology to make the stores more fun and foster brand loyalty. That's important too. I mean, consumers want a reason to stick around in your store a lot longer. If you give them these little things, curiosity, driving technologies, I think that's the way to kind of, we've seen a lot of success out of those retailers who've made it more of an experience. And then connecting with consumers outside of the four walls, loyalty programs, delivery services, finding a way to get that one-on-one marketing is very important. So with that, we're going to, I think, start Q&A.
You mentioned that millennials and Gen Z parents are adopting new forms of technology like Internet of Things, the IoT, and other ways to connect with them. What's your advice for brands as far as where to play with them? They're playing in different spaces every day, it seems like.
Yes, that's definitely true, Hope. And Babycenter is a brand we've realized that for a couple years now that Babycenter, our website, is not the center of her universe like it used to be 10 or even 20 years ago. So we've had to take a different approach to content and developing different forms of content for different platforms, whether that be apps. We're testing a lot in voice right now. We're testing a number of different IoT devices. So my advice to brands is really to test and learn. We found in our research that the older Gen Z parents still do look for brand recommendations on Facebook. They still like email because they can curate that themselves. So they have so much control over what information and what content they consume and where. There is no one platform that is the silver bullet. So you've really got to really understand your consumer and your audience and where they're going for what type of information, and just test and learn.
Cool, thanks. And this next one's for Brian from Pinterest. Can you give us an example of how brands are most effectively, how Pinterest is most effectively working with your retail partners, maybe a 2-minute case study of a really good kind of a win for a brand?
Sure. I mean, I won't name any particular retailers, but I think what we've discovered is, and if you think back to what I discussed during the presentation, is that Pinterest really has an opportunity to influence people throughout the funnel, right? And so what we're trying to figure out right now is how do we drive like inspiration and just awareness of new products that you might be able to buy in a Target, to how do we drive e-commerce transactions that are ROAS positive, at Target.com. So I guess I did speak to a retailer, but. And that's hard, right? To have a product that does each of those two things effectively. So that's kind of like what we're focused on doing. And there's a load of challenges on both sides of kind of where people are at across that purchase funnel. But that's what we're trying to figure out. And we're learning every day. And it's a kind of an inspiring time to kind of be working really closely with retailers that are trying to figure out how they exist in this new world, right? Because let's be honest, like the day that this Amazon and Whole Foods transaction was announced, like that was probably a rough day to work in Bentonville or in Minneapolis. So it's a tough world out there.
Cool. Okay, let's go to the audience. We have questions from the audience. Back in the middle.
Thank you. Google recently released a stat that at least 20% of searches are now voice search. So if you're talking about Pinterest being a search platform in the next 5 years, are you guys talking about that internally in terms of how you're going to kind of transition your platform into a voice search capability?
Yeah, so if you just think for a second about how Pinterest is different than Google, right? Pinterest is all visual, right? Like we can use keywords to target pins to the right people, but at the end of the day, I think the visual nature of Pinterest will continue to be more relevant as we go forward into the future. So there's that component of it. We're also thinking long and hard about real-world pinning. So we introduced a product called Lens, which is integrated into some of the new Samsung phones. But essentially what that enables you to do is to use your camera on your phone as a discovery device. So if you're walking down the street this afternoon and you happen to see a gentleman with a nice pair of shoes that you wanted to check out, like you could stop them and take a picture of them, and those shoes would probably come up on Pinterest, right? And perhaps you decide to buy them, or perhaps you found a cheaper pair of shoes that are equally as interesting, and maybe you buy those. So we're embracing the visual nature of the platform. As it pertains to voice and all of that, I think there will certainly be applications. But we're a small, scrappy company. We've got to get the visual thing done first, and then I think potentially move on down the road. But I think going back to the start of your question, like we're 100% aligned that the future of search is probably not connected to text. Right. And I would believe that to be true.
Cool, thanks. And then, do we have any more audience questions before I ask another question?
This question's for Julie. Are you guys localizing or targeting content? Are you guys locally targeting content by region? Do you find that parents are different depending on the city they are? I've noticed as a parent there's a lot of like local mom, dad groups that are popping up. Is that something that you guys are trying to compete with, or is that not your focus?
Great question. And there are definitely lots of things about parenthood and becoming a mom that are universal. All around the world, but there are certainly lots of things that influence you as a parent on the local level too. So we have a community of moms and dads, and there are lots of local digital groups that form naturally. Some have even met each other. So there's definitely a very big local community aspect. But when it comes to basic parenting information, how to change a diaper, how to get your kid to eat, if they're a picky eater, is pretty much the same, whether you live in San Francisco or Chicago. So that type of, that is basically evergreen, and it's pretty similar, at least to the United States. We absolutely localize that around the world because there are very, very big differences when it comes to some certain types of content like food and other traditions and cultural nuances. But in the US, it's pretty much the same, and that community aspect fills that local void.
Cool. Okay. Any other audience questions?
One over here. I just had a quick question. Thinking about the low income. Oh, sorry. When thinking about the low income consumer, how does that change, or does the acquisition that Amazon just made change their behaviors at all? Because we don't really think about the low income consumer as a prime membership holder. So does that change the dynamic at all?
Yeah, it's another great question, and something that right now it seems like Amazon has been more focused at the high end, but subtly been doing things at the low end as well. One of the things they've been doing is moving Prime to a month-to-month subscription, and also allowing those customers and government assistance to use Prime memberships. It's something they've been partnering with the government for some time to try to allow and then roll it out. It's something that's actually been out there for about a year, but it's been slow to gain traction. This is the one it would be very interesting to see what happens with it, because obviously one of the goals of the Whole Foods acquisition is to increase frequency, get that basket, get more purchases more often. What will happen with that too is the company will backfill some of like the third and fourth brands at Whole Foods with their own private label, and if they build out that presence with that, then you can start to see some of that rolled into dollar stores or even through Amazon's platform. So if you have a a private label organic product that you could market to a lower income consumer, I think that might help to accelerate that. But that's something I think will be very important, because obviously that's been a domain that dollar stores and Walmart have played in, but Amazon's trying to get there. But at the same time, Walmart's not giving up without a fight here either. You've got the Jet.com acquisition, led by a former Amazon guy who's looking to get back at Amazon. So I think that could be very dangerous. The dollar stores are not sitting around either too. So I think it's an area Amazon gets into. It's kind of wait and see on the traction side though too.
We're going to wrap this panel up. I want to thank all the panelists.